Hi, everybody. I'm Hector Garcia, and I am an accountant, and I've been practicing for almost 15 years. However, I'll let you in a little secret. When I was a kid, I did not want to be an accountant. I actually wanted to be a graphic designer. And then maybe a little later on, I wanted to be an architect. And I will never forget when Toy Story, the movie, the first one came out, and I first saw this 3D graphics on the screen. And I saw this beautiful merge of the sort of technical capabilities of an architect to know space and measurements and shapes and that sort of thing. And then this sort of beautiful, creative, and artistic side of graphic design manifested into this beautiful movie. I said to myself, this is what I want to do. I want to be a 3D animator. Now, life didn't turn out that way. I ended up as an accountant. And there's this creative side of me that's been sort of journeying to come out. And granted, I think I've used tons of this creativity potential in my practice in the last couple of years. And I'm quite proud of what I built in terms of my accounting firm and my business. And now that I have a relatively successful firm and I have this followership in YouTube, I've been in sort of this self discovery where I've been trying to figure out, am I supposed to be something more than just an accountant? And while I believe that, I truly believe that I am something more than an accountant, I've been wanting to manifest that in a big way. Now, through the inspiration of multiple people that I admire and mentors of mine, I decided to create a conference in Miami where I'm going to bring 100 other accountants so we can talk about this potential bridging the gap between the accounting side and the creativity side. The conference is called Creative Business Models for Accountants. It's in October. It's in Miami. I'll put a link in the description. But this is not about the conference itself. This is about this research I've been doing about creativity. And I've spent multiple months just looking into, okay, what does this whole left brain, left, right brain concept mean? What does creativity mean? Why are accountants inherently not that creative? And why are creative people inherently not that good at things like accounting? So in this research, I found a video from John Cleese, and John Cleese is one of the brains behind Monty Python's Flying Circus, which is a comedy show from England, kind of like Saturday Night Live, but it's its own thing. It's its own brand. And John Cleese is an incredibly funny person, incredibly smart person, and he did this speech. And this is part of the research. I've been watching a lot of videos, reading stuff, listening to the podcasts about creativity specifically. And I stumbled upon this speech where he talks about creativity, talks about it in front of an open crowd. This is like in the 90s. And this entire video is brilliant. It's about almost 40 minutes long. And I took that video and I cut it in different segments and I cut out some of the jokes just so like we can focus specifically on the content. And I'm going to play this video for you and I'm going to break it down into different elements. And then I'm going to give you sort of like my perspective of why I think that particular segment is important, valuable, and how I connect that with my life, with my business, my practice, my clients now in the year 2023. So I hope you enjoy this video. And again, if you want to watch the original video, I'll put a link to that below. And he's got a lot of jokes sort of built in, but I found the jokes a little distracting, even though it's part of the content. I wanted to just kind of focus on like, what does creativity mean for accountants? And this video inspired me so much to just think about all the things that I'm going to be presenting in the conference in Miami. And I wanted to share this with you. So if you are coming to the conference, essentially this is your homework. I sent you an email saying you have to watch this video. And if you're not going to the conference, I think in either case, I think you'll get tons of value from going through this. So the video will be an hour long, and God bless you if you go through the whole thing. And if you do go through the whole thing and you enjoy it, put it in the comments. Let me know what about did you like. Let me know which parts did you like. Let me know if you have a different opinion. So let's get started.
You see, the reason why it is futile for me to talk about creativity is that it simply cannot be explained. It's like Mozart's music or Van Gogh's painting, or it is literally inexplicable. Freud, who analyzed practically everything else, repeatedly denied that psychoanalysis could shed any light whatsoever on the mysteries of creativity. And Brian Bates wrote to me recently, most of the best research on creativity was done in the 60s and 70s, with a quite dramatic drop-off in quantity after then, largely, I suspect, because researchers began to feel that they had reached the limits of what science could discover about it. In fact, the only thing from the research that I could tell you about how to be creative is the sort of childhood that you should have had, which is of limited help to you at this point of your lives. However, there is one negative thing that I can say. And it's negative because it's easier to say what creativity isn't. A bit like the sculptor who, when asked how he had sculpted a very fine elephant, explained that he'd taken a big block of marble and then knocked away all the bits that didn't look like an elephant.
So one thing that I find fascinating about this is I think most of us think of creativity as a process of creation, right? You build things upon other things, kind of like Legos, right? Like, you know, there's nothing on the table. There's just a bunch of scattered pieces, and then you will feel creative at the end when you build a tower or something. But you're always sort of building on top of something else. And in this particular example, he says sometimes creativity is removing things. So although that's kind of abstract still, I find that particular premise and that start of this conversation absolutely fascinating. All right, let's keep going.
Now, here's the negative thing. Creativity is not a talent. It is not a talent. It is a way of operating. You see, when I say a way of operating, what I mean is this. Creativity is not an ability that you either have or do not have. It is, for example, and this may surprise you, absolutely unrelated to IQ. McKinnon showed in investigating scientists, architects, engineers, and writers that those regarded by their peers as most creative were in no way whatsoever different in IQ from their less creative colleagues. So in what way were they different? Well, McKinnon showed that the most creative had simply acquired a facility for getting themselves into a particular mood, a way of operating, which allowed their natural creativity to function. In fact, McKinnon described this particular facility as an ability to play.
Okay, an ability to play. And I also find it very encouraging that creativity has nothing to do with IQ. And I also love the fact that he's saying right off the bat that this is not a talent you're born with. This is something that you can create, you can build, you can extract or extrude your potential to be creative. And it's a way of being. So absolutely love that as a, sort of the second premise for this conversation. So let's keep going.
Indeed, he described the most creative when in this mood as being childlike. For they were able to play with ideas, to explore them, not for any immediate practical purpose, but just for enjoyment. Play for its own sake. We're comparing the ways in which psychologically healthy families function, and then the ways in which such families function with the ways in which the most successful corporations and organizations function. And we become fascinated by the fact that we can usefully describe the way in which people function at work in terms of two modes, open and closed. So what I can just add now is that creativity is not possible in the closed mode. Okay? Let me explain a little more. By the closed mode, I mean the mode that we are in most of the time when we're at work. We have inside us a feeling that there's lots to be done, and we have to get on with it if we're going to get through it all. It's an active, probably slightly anxious mode, although the anxiety can be exciting and pleasurable. It's a mode in which we're probably a little impatient, if only with ourselves. It has a little tension in it, not much humor. It's a mode in which we're very purposeful, and it's a mode in which we can get very stressed and even a bit manic, but not creative.
Okay, this describes accounting profession so well. This being in the zone of putting a bunch of data in the computer or reconciling a bank account or reviewing reports or whatever, like this mode of like doing just logic work. You see, it just logic work, logic work, logic work puts us in this type of mood where we are very purposeful, we're closed, we're not open to new thinking, new ideas, and really all we're looking for is to be as efficient as possible. So what John is saying here is that in this closed mode, and he'll later on discuss how there's nothing wrong with that. There's actually a time and a place to being in closed mode and open mode, but that this closed mode will not allow any time and space for creativity. And while I absolutely love the fact that sometimes we need that to get work done, too much of that causes stress and anxiety. And I got to tell you, I think, and this is true in my firm, and I've spoken to so many colleagues where it feels that this is 99.9% of the time. So, as much as we appreciate the efficiency of closed work or closed mode work, I think we have got to recognize that there's an opposite side of this, which is an open mode, which we have to purposefully and intentfully seek out. Let's keep going.
By contrast, the open mode is a relaxed, expansive, less purposeful mode, in which we're probably more contemplative, more inclined to humor, which always accompanies a wider perspective, and consequently more playful. It's a mood in which curiosity for its own sake can operate, because we're not under pressure to get a specific thing done quickly. We can play, and that is what allows our natural creativity to surface.
Now, he uses the word curiosity and play. And curiosity, play, and creativity are not necessarily the same concept. I mean, they are connected, but not the same concept. But I think very rarely at work we set up time and space for play. And also, I believe that unfortunately, when we are in closed mode and when we are in the zone, when we're trying to be as efficient as possible, curiosity seems to be a burden. Like somebody interrupting us and or calling us or asking us a question of something they're truly curious about, and having to like stop the work to explore, right, the question or the inquiry, and really truly uh, uh, quench that thirst of curiosity that person has, because it might be a very open question. Stopping the work to do that, to address that, feels so bad and so negative that we just avoid it. We don't just avoid it as the person that's in the zone, but also as maybe the person that at any point in time had this curiosity about something. And that person, because of the reaction of maybe somebody else at work, of asking a question or again, manifesting that curiosity, they don't do it as well. So in many of our accounting organizations, we are suppressing curiosity systematically because we're trying to be as efficient as possible. So being creative, being curious, being playful is the complete opposite of being efficient and productive. And again, most of us run businesses to be as profitable as possible, to be as efficient as possible, to be as least wasteful as possible. But in that journey, we kill all the creativity. Let's keep
Now, let
going.
me give you an example of what I mean. When Alexander Fleming had the thought that led to the discovery of penicillin, he must have been in the open mode. The previous day, he'd arranged a number of dishes so that culture would grow upon them. On the day in question, he glanced at the dishes and he discovered that on one of them, no culture had appeared. Now, if he'd been in the closed mode, he would have been so focused upon his need for dishes with cultures grown upon them that when he saw that one dish was of no use to him for that purpose, he would quite simply have thrown it away. But thank goodness he was in the open mode, so he became curious about why the culture had not grown on this particular dish. And that curiosity, as the world knows, led him to penicillin. Now, in the closed mode, an uncultured dish is an irrelevance. In the open mode, it's a clue.
In the open mode, it's a clue. Okay. I have a question for you. Is there a penicillin discovery version in the accounting profession? Is there a clue that we can have in a state of creativity and playfulness and curiosity that will lead us to a discovery that will substantially change how we operate as accountants, how we operate as small businesses interacting with accountants? I mean, penicillin was a huge, humongous discovery and significant change to modern medicine. But we have not had in accounting this penicillin moment. You can argue that some accountants using AI might be it. Not 100% sure. I think our profession is inherently stuck in closed mode, and until we unlock that, uh, we probably will never have that eureka penicillin discovery moment. So this is why I like this video, because it makes me truly and deeply think about myself. What is my role here? And do I have a role helping other colleagues think about this stuff in different and abstract ways? Because I don't have the answer. I don't know what the answer is. But it's evident that closed mode thinking is not going to lead us to it. I just keep watching.
Now, one more example. One of Alfred Hitchcock's regular co-writers has described working with him on screenplays. He says, when we came up against a block and our discussions became very heated and intense, Hitchcock would suddenly stop and tell a story that had nothing to do with the work at hand. At first, I was almost outraged. And then I discovered that he did this intentionally. He mistrusted working under pressure. He would say, we're pressing, we're working too hard, relax, it will come. And, says the writer, of course, it finally always did. But let me make one thing quite clear. We need to be in the open mode when we're pondering a problem. But once we come up with a solution, we must then switch to the closed mode to implement it. Because once we've made a decision, we are efficient only if we go through with it decisively, undistracted by doubts about its correctness. For example, if you decide to leap a ravine, the moment just before takeoff is a bad time to start reviewing alternative strategies. When you're attacking a machine gun post, you should not make a particular effort to see the funny side of what you're doing. Humor is a natural concomitant of the open mode, but it's a luxury in the closed one. No, once we've taken a decision, we should narrow our focus while we're implementing it. And then after it's been carried out, we should once again switch back to the open mode to review the feedback arising from our action in order to decide whether the course that we have taken is successful or whether we should continue with the next stage of our plan. Whether we should create an alternative plan to correct any error we've perceived. And then back into the closed mode again to implement that next stage, and so on.
Okay, so simple strategy. You go to open mode, creativity, think of strategy in a high level. Give yourself time to think, then put a plan together, go execute, execution and implementation is in closed mode. No time to stop and think creatively during the execution. Just execute, follow the plan. The plan will not go always as planned, for lack of a better term, and we switch back from closed mode to open mode to do an after action review, to discuss amongst yourself, your colleagues, just give deep thought. Did that work? Did that not work? Why? And change the strategy if you need to, and then go back again to closed mode to execute. So it's this notion of being able to switch back and forth intentionally. That's what I understand from this.
In other words, to be at our most efficient, we need to be able to switch backwards and forwards between the two modes. But here's the problem. We too often get stuck in the closed mode. Under the pressures which are all too familiar to us, we tend to maintain tunnel vision at times when we really need to step back and contemplate the wider view. This is particularly true, for example, of politicians. The main complaint about them from their non-political colleagues is that they become so addicted to the adrenaline that they get from reacting to events on an hour-by-hour basis that they almost completely lose the desire or the ability to ponder problems in the open mode. So, as I say, creativity is not possible in the closed mode. There is just one other thing that I can say about creativity. There are certain conditions which do make it more likely that you'll get into the open mode and that something creative will occur. More likely. You can't guarantee anything will occur. You might sit around for hours, as I did last Tuesday, and nothing. Zilch. Nevertheless, I can at least tell you how to get yourselves into the open mode. You need 5 things. 1, space. 2, time. 3, confidence. Okay, let's take space
Okay,
first.
I had to cut a little part out for some random reason, but there's 5 things: is space, time, he repeats time twice, confidence, and humor. So space, time, confidence, and humor. Let's see what this
Let's
leads me.
take space first. You can't become playful and therefore creative if you're under your usual pressures, because to cope with them, you've got to be in the closed mode, right? So you have to create some space for yourself away from those demands. And that means sealing yourself off. You must make a quiet space for yourself where you will be undisturbed.
Okay, just to be clear, he talked about this prior to mobile phones existing and really the internet and social media and all that stuff. I think the physical space, I think, is important too, to physically be maybe in a different room or locked in a room or not in the same room where you're usually doing the type of work that distracts you quite a bit. However, I think what he really means is attention. It's not just physical space, it's attention. It really means turning off the distractions so you can be in deep thought.
Next, time. It's not enough to create space. You have to create your space for a specific period of time. You have to know that your space will last until exactly, say, 3:30, and that at that moment your normal life will start again. And it's only by having a specific moment when your space starts and an equally specific moment when your space stops that you can seal yourself off from the everyday closed mode in which we all habitually operate. And I'd never realized how vital this was until I read a historical study of play by a Dutch historian called Johan Huizinga. And in it he says, play is distinct from ordinary life, both as to locality and duration. This is its main characteristic, its secludedness, its limitedness. Play begins, and then at a certain moment, it is over. Otherwise, it's not play. So,
I've only understood this after I had kids, and kids of a certain age. If you have kids, you probably been through this. In order to make the kids do something that they don't want to do, make them want to do it, you have to label it play. So if you turn things into a game, or what they call gamification, kids are more likely to do it, even if it's the exact same thing. For example, let's say I leave my wallet upstairs and I tell my son, hey, can you get my wallet? I left it upstairs. Most of the time, the immediate reaction is to drag their feet or say no or try to avoid me in any way, shape, or form. However, many times I tell my kid, hey, last time you got my wallet, it was 8.3 seconds. You think you can do it faster this time? Go. Immediately, they go pick up the wallet and come back. It is the same task, but it's reframed as play. And do we have a version of that in our accounting firms? Do we have a version of that in our small businesses? I feel that for the most part, even though we want to, I don't think we intently create that type of purposeful time and space to play or make the work feel like play.
So, combining the first two factors, we create an oasis of quiet for ourselves by setting boundaries of space and of time. Now, creativity can happen, because play is possible when we're separate from everyday life. So, you've arranged to take no calls, you've closed your door, you've sat down somewhere comfortable, you've taken a couple of deep breaths, and if you're anything like me, after you've pondered some problem that you want to turn into an opportunity for about 90 seconds, you find yourself thinking, oh, I forgot. I've got to call Jim. Oh, and I must tell Tina that I need the report on Wednesday and not Thursday, which means I must move my lunch with Joe. And damn, I haven't called St. Paul's about getting Joe's daughter an interview, and I must pop out this afternoon to get Will's birthday present, and those plants need watering, and none of my pencils are sharpened, and right, I've got too much to do, so I'm going to start by sorting out my paper clips, and then I shall make 27 phone calls, and I'll do some thinking tomorrow when I've got everything out of the way. Because, as we all know, it's easier to do trivial things that are urgent than it is to do important things that are not urgent, like thinking.
It is easier to do trivial things that are not urgent than doing important things that are not urgent, like thinking. Interesting.
And it's also easier to do little things we know we can do than to start on big things that we're not so sure about. So, when I say create an oasis of quiet, know that when you have, your mind will pretty soon start racing again, but you're not going to take that very seriously. You just sit there for a bit, tolerating the racing and the slight anxiety that comes with that. And after a time, your mind will quieten down again. Now, because it takes some time for your mind to quieten down, it's absolutely no use arranging a space-time oasis lasting 30 minutes, because just as you're getting quieter and getting into the open mode, you'll have to stop, and that is very deeply frustrating. So you must allow yourself a good chunk of time. I'd suggest about an hour and a half. Then after you've gotten to the open mode, you'll have about an hour left for something to happen, if you're lucky. But don't put a whole morning aside. My experience is that after about an hour and a half, you need a break. So it's far better to do an hour and a half now, and then an hour and a half next Thursday, and maybe an hour and a half week after that, than to fix one 4.5-hour session now. Now I'm going to tell you about how to use the oasis that you've created. Why do you still need time? Well, let me tell you a story. I was always intrigued that one of my Monty Python colleagues, who seemed to be, to me, more talented than I was, did never produce scripts as original as mine. And I watched for some time, and then I began to see why. If he was faced with a problem, and fairly soon saw a solution, he was inclined to take it, even though, I think, he knew the solution was not very original. Whereas if I was in the same situation, although I was sorely tempted to take the easy way out and finish by 5 o'clock, I just couldn't. I'd sit there with the problem for another hour and a quarter, and by sticking at it, would, in the end, almost always come up with something more original. It was that simple. My work was more creative than his simply because I was prepared to stick with the problem longer.
This is interesting. So, first he says that it should be at least 90 minutes, and then after the 90 minutes, you have about another hour in which something can happen, and then it tells you to take a break. Maybe that's it for the day in terms of like deep creative thought. Maybe you can resume tomorrow. So that's an interesting insight in terms of specific timing. But one of the things that he says here specifically, which really stuck by me, is if we start thinking creatively in open mode to try to solve a specific problem, a finite problem, the minute we come up with one solution, one viable solution, one efficient solution, we stop and we go with that solution. Whereas what John is saying is, hey, maybe you came up with a solution, but keep at it, keep thinking about it, look at it from another angle, come up with multiple versions of that solution. In other words, don't think to solve, think to think. Give yourself enough time to do deep thinking. Then, from that thinking, start looking for potential solutions. That's a big contrast from how we do it in most small businesses, even in accounting, is let's brainstorm, solve the problem, move on. Where I think he's looking at these problems as more evergreen, more abstract, uh, and maybe more infinite in terms of that a problem is always evolving. Therefore, our thinking of the solution should always be evolving. So, like, don't fall into the trap of just, okay, I got a solution, I'm done. That's what I think he's trying to tell us here.
So imagine my excitement when I found that this was exactly what McKinnon found in his research. He discovered that the most creative professionals always played with the problem for much longer before they tried to resolve it, because they were prepared to tolerate that slight discomfort and anxiety that we all experience when we haven't solved a problem. You know what I mean? If we have a problem and we need to solve it, until we do, we feel it inside us, a kind of internal agitation, a tension or uncertainty that makes us just plain uncomfortable. And we want to get rid of that discomfort. So in order to do so, we take a decision. Not because we're sure it's the best decision, but because taking it will make us feel better. Well, the most creative people have learned to tolerate that discomfort for much longer. And so, just because they put in more pondering time, their solutions are more creative. Now, the people I find it hardest to be creative with are people who need, all the time, to project an image of themselves as decisive, and who feel that to create this image, they need to decide everything very quickly and with a great show of confidence.
Wow. As a professional, as an accountant, I've always felt that the customer expectations were when they ask us a question, whether it's a technical or conceptual question, that what makes us professional is the fact that we can answer off the cuff, that we know the answer, that our experience is so deep that we can immediately solve the problem and be quick thinking and decisive. And I've always thought uh, the opposite would make me unprofessional. Like telling somebody, let me think about this, or telling someone, let's go through the problem a little bit more. Let's deepen the concept. Let's ask some more questions. Let's look for alternative ways of thinking about this problem. Is this even a problem? Or why is this a problem? So I find it that, and this was me, and in some cases it still continues to be me, where professionalism is connected directly with decisiveness. And he's saying the opposite. He's saying, yes, decisiveness is great, but decisiveness will stop the thinking. That's that's kind of a big deal, and it's a borderline paradigm shift for our profession, I think.
Well, this behavior, I suggest sincerely, is the most effective way of strangling creativity at birth. But please note, I'm not arguing against real decisiveness. I'm 100% in favor of taking a decision when it has to be taken and then sticking to it while it's being implemented. What I'm suggesting to you is that before you take a decision, you should always ask yourself the question, when does this decision have to be taken? And having answered that, you defer the decision until then in order to give yourself maximum pondering time.
Such a simple thing, right? Such a simple thing. Uh, it happens to me all the time. I believe that the faster I make one decision now, the quicker I can get to my next thing. And then I make a decision quickly, the quickly I get to my next thing. Instead of just saying, okay, I came up with a version of the solution, but I don't have to make the decision now. Now, this might feel like procrastination. And I'm telling you, I, I could totally see how I could misuse this and totally procrastinate and make the decisions last minute. And maybe I could make bad decisions if I wait till last minute. But this is also sort of the other side of the coin, right? So I could totally mess things up if I wait till last minute to make a decision. And he's saying you could totally mess this up if you make the decisions too early. So there's somewhere in the middle, there's a potential to maximize where you can make the best possible decision because you gave yourself time and space to think more about it and deeply before making that decision.
Which will lead you to the most creative solution. And if while you're pondering, somebody accuses you of indecision, say, look, baby cakes, I don't have to decide till Tuesday, and I'm not chickening out of my creative discomfort by taking a snap decision before then. That's too easy. So, to summarize, the third factor that facilitates creativity is time. Giving your mind as long as possible to come up with something original. When you're in your space-time oasis, getting into the open mode, nothing will stop you being creative so effectively as the fear of making a mistake. Now, if you think about play, you'll see why. True play is experiment. What happens if I do this? What would happen if we did that? What if? The very essence of playfulness is an openness to anything that may happen, a feeling that whatever happens, it's okay. So you cannot be playful if you're frightened that moving in some direction will be wrong, something you shouldn't have done. I mean, you're either free to play or you're not. As Alan Watts puts it, you can't be spontaneous within reason. So you've got to risk saying things that are silly and illogical and wrong. And the best way to get the confidence to do that is to know that while you're being creative, nothing is wrong. There's no such thing as a mistake, and any drivel may lead to the breakthrough.
I find this to be the biggest wall barrier that particularly like my employees in my firm have, which is the fear of making a mistake stops them from trying, from just trying. The fear of making a mistake stops them from thinking outside of like what they think the only single one answer is. And the fear of making a mistake makes people anxious, so anxious that I think it truly stunts creativity. I think most people think that the cost of the mistake is potentially so high that it's better not to even try to be creative. Whereas I believe it might be the total opposite. Whereas the cost of the mistake might be much lower than the reward from the learning from that mistake. That's why people say that we learn from our mistakes. But how often at work do we have an environment and a culture where mistakes are embraced rather than shunned? This made me think a lot. He put into words uh, things that I was thinking, but I didn't know how quite to explain them. And quite frankly, I don't know what the actual pathway is, the actual solution is. But I think like creating awareness that mistakes, within reason, of course, uh, they can be a good thing. I think that the trick here is to build a culture around not just allowing people to make mistakes, because if you make mistakes all day long, that could cost your business. But are we systematically grabbing mistakes and turning them into learnings? Or are we systematically grabbing mistakes, fixing them and hiding them, or grabbing mistakes and being so embarrassed by them that we just avoid discussing them, or just ignoring them and moving on to the next issue or task and just forgetting about that mistake, but forgetting that mistake could potentially be a great learning, not just for the person that made the mistake, for the entire organization. So that in particular has made me think really, really hard in terms of like, what does that have to do with creativity? Like what role does creativity and curiosity and play have to do with this fear of mistakes?
And now, the last factor, the fifth, humor. Well, I happen to think the main evolutionary significance of humor is that it gets us from the closed mode to the open mode quicker than anything else. I think we all know that laughter brings relaxation and that humor makes us playful, yet how many times have important discussions been held where really original and creative ideas were desperately needed to solve important problems, but where humor was taboo because the subject being discussed was so serious? This attitude seems to me to stem from a very basic misunderstanding of the difference between serious and solemn. Now, I suggest to you that a group of us could be sitting around after dinner discussing matters that were extremely serious, like the education of our children or our marriages or the meaning of life, and I'm not talking about the film. And we could be laughing, and that would not make what we were discussing one bit less serious. Solemnity, on the other hand, I don't know what it's for.
This is so interesting. One of the things that you learn through comedy is that laughter is a confession. So when you see a comedian making fun of something, and that something is ridiculous, but people laugh, it's because it's true. So it's ridiculously true. And if you find yourself laughing at something that in serious mode, you normally wouldn't even discuss it, or it would be taboo, because in serious mode, in professional mode, in decisive mode, just talking about that would just feel so out of place. But when it's used in a comedic context, you laugh and laugh and laugh. You're you're admitting that you believe that thing to be true. So if we find ourselves in a situation, in a tough situation, in a uptight situation, discussing something serious, and then something funny or humorous comes about, and one person laughs, or maybe the opposite is afraid to laugh, we tend to immediately think, that person is being unserious. How can you not be serious at this moment? But I think what John is telling us is, hey, if you find yourself laughing about it, or somebody else laughing about it, or finding the humorous side of it, that's because there's a hidden truth, or there's a truth that you don't want to discuss or bring it out to the open. And again, you're using your closed mode thinking, your decisive thinking, to shun it, to get rid of it. Because again, we think in these two contexts of open mode and closed mode. So I think John is telling us, give yourself permission to laugh and find humor and stuff, because in that process, you might find a deeper truth that wasn't evident when you were not laughing or using humorous context.
I mean, what is the point of it? The two most beautiful memorial services that I've ever attended both had a lot of humor, and it somehow freed us all and made the services inspiring and cathartic. But solemnity, it serves pomposity, and the self-important always know at some level of their consciousness that their egotism is going to be punctured by humor. That's why they see it as a threat. And so dishonestly pretend that their deficiency makes their views more substantial, when it only makes them feel bigger.
Humor punctures egotism. Look, I have ego too. We all have egos. Everybody has an ego. Some are bigger than others. But humor pierces right through it. So, of course, I'm not a comedian. I'm not a John Cleese. It's not the humor doesn't come easy to me. I'm sure it doesn't come easy to a lot of people. But is there an opportunity for us accountants, small business owners, to intentionally insert just more humor in our everyday discussions of problem solving? And could that be an enablement to more creative thought? Don't know what the answer is, but this is what this particular thing makes me think about.
No, humor is an essential part of spontaneity, an essential part of playfulness, an essential part of the creativity that we need to solve problems, no matter how serious they may be. So, when you set up a space-time oasis, giggle all you want. And there, ladies and gentlemen, are the 5 factors which you can arrange to make your lives more creative. Space, time, confidence, and Lord Jeffrey Archer. So, now you know how to get into the open mode. The only other requirement is that you keep your mind gently round the subject you're pondering. Your daydream, of course, but you just keep bringing your mind back, just like with meditation. Because, and this is the extraordinary thing about creativity, if you just keep your mind resting against the subject in a friendly but persistent way, sooner or later, you will get a reward from your unconscious. Probably in the shower later, or at breakfast the next morning, but suddenly you are rewarded. Out of the blue, a new thought mysteriously appears. If you've put in the pondering time first.
That's big. That's big. So I've many times have had these great ideas in the shower or in the bathroom or whatever, like the way he's mentioning here. But it's so very true that they seemingly don't really come out of nowhere. I had probably given this thing or this issue some thought for about an hour prior to that, like shower cap thought. So, as they say, no pain, no gain. The gain of creative thought is new ideas. The pain is creating the time and space to just think without expecting the ideas. And randomly, the ideas come about because you put in the work. That's really cool.
Looking at you all reminds me, I think it's easy to be creative if you've got other people to play with. I always find that if 2 or more of us throw ideas backwards and forwards, I get to more interesting and original places than I could ever have got to on my own. But there is a danger, a real danger, if there's one person around you who makes you feel defensive. You lose the confidence to play, and it's goodbye creativity. So always make sure your play friends are people that you like and trust.
I am so blessed that I have my brother, my wife, my sister, my business partners, my parents, who are always open to hearing my crazy ideas or my thought process, or even open to brainstorming with me. And I think that I have to contribute part of that success to having other people around me, not judging, with an open mind, and also them contributing without feeling that they're going to be judged on their contributions. So there's this sort of social contract among colleagues or friends that in order to make this thing work, new ideas, creative thought, problem solving, we all have to play by the same rules. And the rules are, hey, there are no rules. you, you can say whatever you want, you can say whatever you feel. Nothing's stupid, nothing's dumb, nothing's a bad idea or inherently a good idea. We don't get married to an idea, a good one or a bad one. We just play. Just play, play, play. Just brainstorm and something will come out. So I like this a lot.
And never say anything to squash them either. Never say no or wrong or I don't like that. Always be positive and build on what's been said. Would it be even better if? I don't quite understand that. Can you just explain it again? Go on. What if? Let's pretend. Try to establish as free an atmosphere as possible. And you know, sometimes I wonder if the success of the Japanese isn't partly due to their instinctive understanding of how to use groups creatively. You know, Westerners are often amazed at the unstructured nature of Japanese meetings. But maybe it's just that very lack of structure, that absence of time pressure, that frees them to solve problems so creatively. And how clever of the Japanese sometimes to plan that unstructuredness by, for example, insisting that the first people to give their views are the most junior, so that they can speak freely without the possibility of contradicting what's already been said by somebody more important.
I'm going to confess on this one, as the founder of my business, the leader of my business, the one that is also the face of the business and promotes the business. Not that I don't, uh, not that I discount the value of what other people in my team bring. I tend to forget for a second that the value is going to come from them, not from me. I've already put in all the work, already put in all the ideas. The new stuff, the magic, is going to come from others. And sometimes I tend to make the mistake to sort of overpower or overshadow a conversation because maybe it's my personality, or maybe is uh, people respect me as well, and uh, but this is so true. Many times the seniors, people with the most experience, the people that are most successful, whatever it is, tend to lead the conversation and drive. And although the sort of the lower level folks are allowed to give some input, we don't lead with that. And I think that's the lesson here is lead with that. Okay. Not that the leaders don't have a role. The leaders absolutely have a role. And a lot of breakthroughs will come from the leaders as well. But are we leading with the folks that are seemingly not necessarily the leaders? So that's a real interesting sort of contradiction and non-intuitive thought process.
Well, look, the very last thing that I can say about creativity is this: it's like humor. In a joke, the laugh comes at a moment when you connect two different frameworks of reference in a new way. Having an idea, a new idea, is exactly the same thing. It's connecting two hitherto separate ideas in a way that generates
Now,
new
okay,
meaning.
a couple things here. Jokes, humor. If you know the punchline is coming, whether because you heard the punchline before or it's blatantly obvious the way it's being set up, Or in a movie, if you're like, you just know what's going to happen, you just know what they're going to say, you know what the ending's going to be, and it's not surprising. It's not. It's not very fun. I think he's saying is the surprise is the single most important factor here. And in order to be surprised, generally, the idea or the punchline, the solution, comes completely out of left field. And it comes from seemingly not the true obvious connections that you're making along the way. They come from sometimes opposite, totally polar opposite ideas. And it's when you bring these two things together that don't seem to be things you can put together. And somehow the framing, the story, everything you're building around it somehow makes it fit in a very surprising way. That's the punchline. That's the part that makes it humorous. And also the part that makes the ideas or the solutions to be true breakthroughs and through disruptions.
Now, connecting different ideas isn't difficult. You can connect cheese with motorcycles, or moral courage with light green, or bananas with international cooperation. You can get any computer to make 1 billion random connections for you. But these new connections or juxtapositions are significant only if they generate new meaning, right? So as you play, you can deliberately try inventing these random juxtapositions and then use your intuition to tell you whether any of them seem to have significance for you. That's the bit the computer can't do. It can produce millions of new connections, but it can't tell which one of them smells interesting. And of course, you'll produce some juxtapositions which are absolutely ridiculous, absurd. Good for you. Because Edward de Bono, who invented the notion of lateral thinking, specifically suggests in his book Poe, Beyond Yes and No, that you can try loosening up your assumptions by playing with deliberately crazy connections. He calls such absurd ideas intermediate impossibles. And he points out that the use of an intermediate impossible is completely contrary to ordinary logical thinking, in which you have to be right at each stage. It doesn't matter if the intermediate impossible is right or absurd. It can nevertheless be used as a stepping stone to another idea that is right. Another example of how, when you're playing, nothing is wrong.
This reminds me, if you think about one of the most powerful companies in the world, Apple. Apple in the early ages started obsessing with design, the design of the product, the design of the user interface, the design of the user experience. And prior to Apple, the computing industry was more about its functionality, where people were most obsessed about writing a piece of code that would make the computer do something that a human was able to do. Okay, um, that only human could do, but now a computer can. So there was obsession on the technical capabilities of the machines, and nobody really thought about obsessing around the design. And Steve Jobs and Apple just took this opposing concept of design and obsessing about design to make an inferior technical product. Apple for a very long time, compared to dollar to dollar with a PC, that was the criticism. It was always, you're it's an inferior technical product because they're spending too much money on design. And then at some point in time, the market completely shifted, and the market realized that the design, the user interface, how you feel about using the machine is essentially more important than what the machine can do. And it's this juxtaposition of opposite ideas that seem silly and dumb created a pathway for one of the most powerful companies in the world. So, and there was no Apple back then. This concept didn't exist back then. So John certainly had a vision for this. It's just incredible.
So, to summarize, if you really don't know how to start, or if you've got stuck, start generating random connections and allow your intuition to tell you if one might lead somewhere interesting. Well, that really is all I can tell you that won't help you to be creative. Everything. And now, in the 2 minutes left, I can come to the important part, and that is how to stop your subordinates becoming creative too, which is the real threat. Because believe me, no one appreciates better than I do what trouble creative people are and how they stop decisive, hard-nosed bastards like us from running businesses efficiently. I mean, we all know we encourage someone to be creative. The next thing is they're rocking the boat, coming up with ideas and asking us questions. Now, if we don't nip this kind of thing in the bud, we'll have to start justifying our decisions by reasoned argument.
Now, obviously, this is sarcasm, but it's extremely important that this creative thinking is not just for a single person, it's for an entire organization. And he's using humor or the sarcasm to say the complete opposite. He's concluding this incredible speech about creativity with humor. He's making a joke about how to stop teams from being creative. Because if they're creative, all these negative things are going to happen. Obviously, he means the opposite. But this is the brilliance of John Cleese, and this is putting the concepts to practice, right? Like humor is very much part of this.
And sharing information, the concealment of which gives us considerable advantages in our power struggle. So, here's how to stamp out creativity in the rest of the organization and get a bit of respect going. 1, allow subordinates no humor. It threatens your self-importance, especially your omniscience. Treat all humor as frivolous or subversive. Because subversive is, of course, what humor will be in your setup, as it's the only way that people can express their opposition. Since if they express it openly, you're down on them like a ton of bricks. So let's get this clear. Blame humor for the resistance that your way of working creates. Then you don't have to blame your way of working. This is important. And I mean that solemnly. Your dignity is no laughing matter. 2nd, keeping ourselves feeling irreplaceable involves cutting everybody else down to size. So don't miss an opportunity to undermine your employees' confidence. A perfect opportunity comes when you're reviewing work that they've done. Use your authority to zero in immediately on all the things you can find wrong. Never balance the negatives with positives. Only criticize, just as your school teachers did. Always remember, praise makes people uppity. 3rd, demand that people should always be actively doing things. If you catch anybody pondering, accuse them of laziness and or indecision. This is to starve employees of thinking time because that leads to creativity and insurrection. So, demand urgency at all time, use lots of fighting talk and war analogies, and establish a permanent atmosphere of stress, of breathless anxiety and crisis. In a phrase, keep that mode closed. Now, in this way, we no-nonsense types can be sure that the tiny, microscopic quantity of creativity in our organization will all be ours. But let your vigilance slip for one moment and you could find yourself surrounded by happy, enthusiastic, and creative people whom you might never be able completely to control ever again. So be careful. Thank you and good night.
I won't comment on the ending, because I'll let John Cleese's ending speak for himself. I really would love to know if, first of all, did you like the speech? And I'll put a link in the description if you want to listen to the speech without any comments. I'm not a big fan of listening to stuff with comments. It's actually sort of first time I do something like this. I was also love to know, do you like this type of stuff? Like you like for me to analyze and break down a speech like this that it's totally not expected, right? For an accountant or for something having to do with accounting. Is this stuff valuable? Is this type of thinking valuable? Has this video or my comments or whatever inspired you to be a more creative thinker or to intentionally insert creativity into your business? I would love to know. Anyway, I am super inspired by this video. I can't believe that it's over 40 years old or over 30 years old, and I've just discovered this. It's amazing. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.